is the June 4th, 2020 Board of Ed Policy Committee meeting. And I'm just going to do a quick roll call. Courtney Troutman, I don't know, maybe I'll just go down the list and everybody can kind of, I see Beth Hostler.
Yes, here.
Ellen Walsh.
I'm here.
Kathy Schmidt. She's going to unmute herself and tell us she's here. I know she will.
I'm here, sorry.
That's okay. I always like to pause with the mute. And Margaret Harrell.
Here, present.
And Mark Cohen.
Here.
And then we also have Dave Smith.
Here.
And Todd Mooney. We're going to make him unmute himself at some point.
No.
All right. Well, he is here and waiting in the wings for us if we need him. So if I could just take this time to call for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to
the
flag
of the
of the United States of America and
to the republic for which it
stands
one nation,
under God,
indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. Thank you. So we have one public comment that I will read. The public comment is from Jan Dorner, and the comment reads, I reviewed the 32 policies listed for discussion during this meeting. All but one seemed appropriate. I got to the last one and was concerned with the changes that were recommended by press through the Illinois Association of School Boards. The change seems to be pointing fingers to others and away from the district. When a parent or community member communicates to the district, they, of all people, are probably not aware of whom the, quote, relevant individuals, close quote, are to whom address their concerns. These people are probably not aware of the board policy 6.235, access to electronic networks, to be able to abide by the standards. This could chill the parents' community desire to communicate for fear that they are not sending it to the right person. I do not understand the need for this change and highly recommend this change not be recommended for approval by the D205 school board. Okay, so that is our only public comment. So that being said, we'll move on to approval of policy committee minutes, and the approval of the September 12th, I think this should say 2019.
You're right. Yep.
Policy committee meeting. Does anybody have any changes to the September 2019 minutes? None being heard, the minutes will stand as reflected. Okay, so we're going to move on to the policy discussion topics. My plan is to kind of walk through the October 2019 and then the March 2020 press change updates. I will kind of just indicate the policy number that we're talking about, and briefly point out the recommended changes that press is making. And then if any discussion is warranted or if anybody wants to talk about it, we can talk about it. And then if not, we can agree that those changes need to be made and move on to the next policy. So the first, and Ellen and Margaret are going to keep me on track when I make any mistakes, which are, inevitable. So, so the first October 2019 policy under review is 2.20. The policy is for the school board, and it is the policy committee that's reviewing it. It's the powers and duties of the school board indemnification. So the changes that they're requesting are to number 3 under the powers of the school board and the duties, talking about employing a superintendent or other personnel, making employment decisions, dismissing personnel, including determining whether an employee has a willfully or negligently failed to report an instance of suspected child abuse or neglect. And then there is an abbreviation for the abuse and child Neglected Child Reporting Act throughout the policy. I have nothing to discuss and agree with the change. So, anybody else?
Looks good.
Okay. Hearing nothing, we will adopt the changes from press for 2.20.
Bring it to a first reading.
And bring it to a first reading at our, what's the next
It'll go
board
to the
meeting?
June 16th meeting.
June 16th meeting. And all of these that we agree to, Ellen, will all go to the first reading on the June 16th meeting, correct?
Correct. And then the second reading will go to the July meeting.
Great, thank you. So the next one is 2.70 concerning vacancies in the school board, filling the vacancies. So the only change with this policy is that they are recommending that the school board vacancies be filled within 60 days versus the current 45-day window. I'm gonna just kind of throw it out there. Is there a downside to giving the board and the superintendent an extra time to make an appropriate filling of a vacancy?
I think the shorter time plays to your advantage, actually. You get somebody in there quicker. Oh, like they're extending it.
Yeah, they're changing it
To
from
60,
45
okay.
to 60.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. We can always fill it earlier.
I was just gonna say, it's not
Yeah.
it's not saying we have to fill it later. So I don't really see a downside to it from my perspective. Is everybody comfortable with that change?
Yeah.
Okay. So the 2.70 change will stand as amended. Moving on to 2.100, board member conflict of interest. So seems to me that they're adding in an entire paragraph about board members participating in contracts that are federally or state awarded, and defining when that conflict of interest exists. Obviously, this makes sense to me. We shouldn't be participating in those kind of decisions when we have a conflict of interest. Is there anything anybody wants to discuss regarding it?
No.
Makes sense.
Okay, 2.100 will stay as amended, will go as amended. Moving on to 2.105. So this one has to do with the Illinois Ethics and Gift Ban Act. Other than some kind of modifications of how a code is represented, the true change to our policy comes in the end of the policy. Complaints of sexual harassment made against board members by elected officials. Am I?
Yes, you're right.
Yeah. Yep. Okay. Ethics. So I think it's a pretty significant paragraph and quite extensive, but obviously it is encouraging the prompt reporting of harassment by anyone in our district to include board members. So I don't see a problem with the change. If anybody else wants to discuss it or sees a question about it.
None.
Okay. Hearing none, 2.105 is adopted. Next one is 2.110. And this has to do with the qualification term and duties of board officers. So there was minor changes in the actual policy. A couple of things, adding, like, obviously if somebody is under the umbrella of a complaint of sexual harassment, they cannot then be considered for a position as an officer. But I think the interesting thing to me is something that Margaret pointed out, that our policy is different than press. And I think we should just make sure everyone's aware of it, that the the policy for press recommends that the board elects the president from its members for a 2-year term. Our policy is for a 1-year term. And I think Margaret is obviously in the best position to kind of give us some insight into why we have that difference. So if you could, please.
So the idea behind the 1-year term was that to make allowance for any changes that may come up or occur where the president was either unwilling or unable to, the president and or the board were unwilling or unable to keep the meetings, the offices the same. So it gives the board flexibility and it increases our flexibility. We can change, we can keep everything the same if we'd like, or we can make changes as may be needed. And that was a decision made from prior boards that each board has reviewed thus far and decided to continue with this practice.
A lot of discussion on this one in the past.
Mm-hmm.
There was a lot of discussion on the terms.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, I mean, go ahead, Mark, sorry.
In that very first paragraph, it says that the officers are elected or appointed by the board at its organizational meeting held in odd numbered years. But then it states that it elects officers for a 1-year term. If it's supposed to be every year, then that odd numbered years section should be struck.
Good catch.
Yep. Yeah, agreed. I mean, Ellen, is there more background that you can provide on the 1-year term?
No, there was a lot of discussion, like Margaret was saying, whether or not, and to be fair, there was a lot of discussion around keeping the term longer, because the thought was that somebody is just getting familiar with the position and now they might be gone and now a new person. So there was much more discussion about making the term length longer than 1 year. But in the end, it was determined that they would go with the 1 year, and hopefully if the person who was in the position was doing a good enough job, they would see fit to reinstate them. You know, like Kara's been the president for how many years now? But yeah, there was big discussion about that, and a lot of people, and this is through several policy committees, and I think Margaret's probably been on them for the past, number of committees that we've been doing, this discussion. But a lot of people like the longer length so that the person could become comfortable with the position before they're voted out for no reason, for obviously a reason, but without giving them a chance. So that's where the discussion came in.
Right.
Yeah. I could definitely see where there are the idea that, it takes a while to learn a role and to be comfortable in that role. I also see the idea of the flexibility if by chance something occurs that there needs to be a change. And that may be just the idea that that person is no longer able to fill that role due to change in circumstances or something else. But there's that flexibility within our policy that allows that.
Yeah.
But that's a decision for every board.
And I'm comfortable with that because I think changing times call for adaptation, and I certainly don't want us to be boxed into a policy where somebody feels like they have to stay somewhere where it doesn't fit into, their other commitments in their life. So I'm comfortable with that. And if everybody else is, I think we just have to, like Mark pointed out, make that change to that paragraph, Ellen, to reflect it correctly, that we're not holding these appointments and elections in odd number years. We're holding them annually.
I think we probably could just take off that whole held in odd number years beginning in 2011. Just a period after organizational meeting.
Yeah.
Yep.
Agreed?
Agreed.
Yep.
Agreed.
That's
Okay.
Great.
good with that.
Okay. So that was 2-110. Moving on to 2-200. This concerns the type of school board meetings. Specifically, there were changes made to what types of subjects can be considered at a closed board meeting. I think that's the heart of this big change, other than kind of grammar changes in other areas. But most notably, the board and board committees may meet in a closed meeting to consider the following subjects. The first one is the appointment, employment, compensation, discipline, performance, or dismissal of specific employees. And here's the change. Specific individuals who serve as independent contractors in a park, recreational, or educational setting, or specific volunteers is what they're adding into that list of subjects that we can discuss. And I think that given the number of contractors we seem to employ, this does seem to be a warranted addition to what we can, under the policy, discuss in a closed meeting.
Yeah, this makes sense to me since we work with different outside groups, Park District and other areas. So this would just give us that flexibility.
Same for me. Margaret, anything?
No, I just think, and you're right. We also from time to time have contracts with our perhaps members on the cabinet or other things. So I think that makes a lot of sense.
Okay, great. So we agree to adopt those changes on 200. So 260 has to do with, let's see, where am I? Uniform grievance procedures. But before I forget, Ellen, there's a couple of places that I noticed throughout here
I
where
changed it already.
Okay, yeah,
I changed it on mine.
Right.
Okay.
Yep. Thank you.
Just boot that Cohen dude out and put Pavone in.
I
Cohen
tried,
out, Pavone in.
I tried, Mark, to keep you in there.
I'm good.
I
Those
think
are
she was
not
hoping.
fun.
I think she was just hoping if she left your name in there for so many of these policies, you would think you weren't leaving. Is I think what she was hoping. So I think the only real significant change to this is that in addition to complaints involving superintendents, they're adding in board members. Was the only significant change to this one, which seems completely makes sense to me. So.
Yeah. And I'll change Mark to Luke.
Yeah, and I'll just, if you want me to note it where I saw it, but
I got it.
There's a few places. Yeah, I figured you did.
Yep.
Okay, so we'll adapt to 260. Moving on to 415, identity protection is the issue. And it really just adds a paragraph to talk about additional protection for individuals to safeguard information under grant awards, which sensitive information and the confidentiality of that information. And it's our duty to ensure that that's maintained. So it makes sense to me. Anyone else?
Yeah, no, makes sense to me too.
Yep. All right, so adopting 415. Going on to 430. And I should I be saying that the administrating reviewer had been giving approval to all these? Should I be mentioning that, Margaret, Ellen? No, it doesn't matter. Okay.
Sure.
So I just
As long as you
think that,
guys know it.
Yeah.
yeah, I apologize. So it just seems, so to me, Chris Welton, his only comment was, he's okay with the change of chief investment officer should be treasurer. That's what his note says. So they're changing everywhere of chief investment officer to the word treasurer.
Yeah, well, what's funny, Courtney, is that the policy has always said chief investment officer, and because they added the new paragraph starting with chief investment officer, now it was brought to our attention that it said it in there and he wants it as treasurer.
Yeah. That's small change.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay. So
All right.
if we're good with that, 430 adopted. Moving on to 460, having to do with operational services purchases and contracts. And it seems that it's just kind of redefining or, redefining each new employee of a contractor that provides services to students or in schools, having to do with their physical fitness to perform those duties. Nothing from me on this one. So, everybody good?
Yep.
All right. 460 adopted. 480.
For
Okay. Did Beth hear that last one? She was away from her screen.
Sorry, keep having to close.
Were
the
you
door.
okay with 460, Beth?
Yes, 460. Yes.
Okay.
I did hear that. Thank you.
I'm sorry. All right. So 480 has to do, and I'm so glad we have the printout of this because I can't imagine scrolling.
oh
No.
yes,
No.
thank you so much.
Thank you, Ellen.
Yeah.
I'm reminded about this. Operational services, accounting and audits. It looks like they're adding in some definition of the capitalization threshold, and a policy regarding disposition of district property. Any questions or discussion? All right, if none, we'll adopt 480.
Sounds
All
good.
right, so next one is 510. Equal employment opportunity and minority recruitment. I think it really, in this one, Luke did get added. So this one Luke's already in charge of.
Yeah.
And so Mark, do you want to elaborate on this? I think it really is just defining the types of criteria or categories of domestic violence or gender violence.
Yeah, the term gender violence is new to the policy, but that's just a reflection of, Title IX protections.
All right. Any comments or discussion?
That's the only.
All right.
Yep.
510 is adopted. 520 is workplace harassment prohibited. Mark, anything here?
No, this is just, again, staying current with, with language reflected in federal law.
Yep. Any comments or discussion? All right. 520 adopted. 530, hiring process and criteria. And this is the same thing, Mark?
Yeah, it's just some language updates. It includes the abuse and neglect. If that's anybody's background, they cannot be, or that should be considered in employing someone. And then there's a little further down, we can't ask about wage or salary history anymore. That's state law now. The only workaround there is that if they've been employed by a school district before, all the information is FOIAble.
All right. Any questions or discussion? All right. 530 is adopted. 550. So this one has to do with drug and alcohol-free workplace. So there was some addition. Mark, do you want to walk through just the additions to this one?
Sure. The change to legal cannabis, or make cannabis now being legal in Illinois but still illegal federally, prompted a change in the policy, as well as Ashley's law, which allows for marijuana products, THC products, to be delivered by a qualified individual to a student for whom it's medically necessary. And so this is just a reflection of what is recommended best practice and policy. The e-cigarettes are also covered in here as well.
So I think the only question I have when I was reading through this is that that they added in that on-call terminology and having a long history of being on call. How many of our employees does that impact? And how soon, is there a procedure where they're notified that they're officially on call so that they can then make the correct choices to be in line with this policy?
I would say that, if we're anticipating a major snow event, and we need our maintenance employees to come in at 3:00 in the morning to start shoveling sidewalks or clearing snow, that's part of it. Also could be applicable to administration. When there's things that, let's say a large event going on at the school, maybe you want to make sure that obviously maybe if the building principal was, York has a big dance, if the building principal is not there for some reason, that, that they're available to be, address any sort of issue or emergency.
Makes sense. All right, any other questions or discussion?
Yeah. I think you brought that up. I mean, it certainly makes sense. I think it's just kind of a difficult, whether you know that you were on call or not. So I think that's somewhat going to be a challenge, but it makes sense.
Yeah, and that's why I brought it up. I mean, there's an administration's view of who should and when should people be on call, and there's an employee's view, right? And so I feel like it's ambiguous, right? And that's why I worry that it puts us in a spot. But I mean, is there a procedure, I guess, Mark, is my question, is there a procedure to let somebody know other than a planned school dance or something that, I mean, obviously stuff that we can't plan for, got it. I mean, it is what it is.
Yeah, I mean, if we have a pipe burst at 11:30 at night on a weekend, you're not going to anticipate that. But now, granted, we do have certain folks who they're on building check. They're coming on checking boilers over the weekend. They're walking the facility. Those individuals should be ready to serve. But in terms of being on call, again, this just applies to weather emergencies, things that we can reasonably anticipate.
Planned for. Okay.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
Right.
Go ahead.
This is down the line. At some point in time, it seems like since this has made its way to our policy, that there should be something in a procedural handbook that kind of defines what's on call and what's not on call, expectations for being on call and what's not on call.
I agree, Margaret.
Yeah, I think that will be helpful to the employees so that they're not like we all want them to be set up to succeed, right? And so I think that if it's clear understanding of how they can do that, it's better for everybody.
In my 3 years in the district, I have not seen an issue with this.
Okay. That's good to know. All right. So we will add 550 to the reading. All right, moving on to 590, abused and neglected child reporting. And I think really this is just a kind of a definition of what negligent failure to report means, right? Or when it happens. And I do like that they've decreased the amount of time that the training needs to occur for our mandated reporters. I mean, 1 year seemed like a really long amount of time to have somebody on a job without having undergone the training.
Just so you know that when we hire when we onboard folks, part of the condition of hire is that they finish. We have a series of videos that new employees have to watch with the Global Compliance Network, GCN, and that mandated reporter training is a part of it before they even really get started. That's part of the onboarding process. And then we require that these modules are done every year.
That's great.
So we go above and beyond. This is the law, but GCN videos are presented to staff every year.
Awesome. All right. Any other questions or discussion about 590? No. All right. Moving on to 5120. Employee ethics, conduct and conflict of interest. Mark, do you want to talk about the paragraph that was added in?
Sure. I'm scrolling. I don't have it in front of me on paper.
See, Ellen's really is mad you're leaving.
Again, this really is that addition is just regarding ANCRA.
Yep. Okay.
So, and then the Government Accountability and Transparency Act further down, making sure the conflicts of interest are identified.
Is there any other questions or discussion for 5120? All right, we'll adopt that. Moving on to 5250. So it doesn't seem, the press change indicates that this is regarding professional personnel leaves of absence. And our policy is different than the IASB version. So I'm just wondering, I think that we're going to keep our policy the way it is. My only question is when they're asking us to change that wording to include the word licensed, how do we make those changes in the bargaining agreement? Is it already in there? I guess my question is.
The licensed is I'm not sure what case happened where an unlicensed physician or an unlicensed therapist or an unlicensed individual made a recommendation for accommodation for somebody or a recommendation for leave. It certainly didn't happen in Elmhurst. This is something that we can certainly put in our policy, because if somebody if somebody comes in with a note written on the back of a napkin from somebody who's not licensed, they have to have some sort of an official script that has their credentials on it and their identity and their license number on it in order for it to be valid. So the word license is just a legal update, nothing more. That it's not going to impact us really in any way.
So I guess my question is the change would be to the part of our policy where we basically say refer to, our agreement, right? So there's nothing in our actual policy that we need to change, but is there something that should be changed in the agreement, or does it say licensed already?
I'm pulling that up now. Any sort of sick leaves that need to be verified, we actually have the right in the agreement, for example, with the teachers. If somebody's out for more than 3 days, we can make them visit a physician of our choosing for return to work, should we wish to do that. The agreement does not necessarily hamstring us from changing our policy to making sure that the person is licensed. There won't be an issue. The language does not get that specific in the bargaining agreements.
Okay. All right.
So are we saying we're keeping our current policy as is with no changes, correct, Mark?
We could add the word licensed.
Where would that go?
But I think I think the only place that would go is in that first area where you say referred to the agreement. That's why I was asking,
Oh,
is we would have to change the agreement to actually add this word licensed in. So
no, then
because
we don't at all. You're right. I'm sorry. I'm going back 14 documents. Yeah, you're right. That's
So
correct.
keep it as is.
Keep it as is.
no changes.
Okay. Okay.
Okay, and then going on to 5290, employment termination and suspensions. And this goes back to, I think, the state law that we've already talked about, willful or negligent failure to report an instance of suspected child abuse or neglect. And I believe that that is the only change.
Right.
So any questions or discussion? All right, we'll adopt it.
Looks good.
So then moving on to 660. So this has to do with curriculum content. And it has to do with changes in Illinois curriculum, correct? Mark, I think,
Specifically
yeah,
civics.
right. The addition of civics in the 6th, 7th, or 8th grade. I did kind of have one question about the curriculum. I noticed that in the curriculum content for not that number 4, where in kindergarten, I'm looking at our policy. The curriculum in grades 4 through 12 can be funded or private grants or federal government, whereas in the press recommendations, it's kindergarten through 12. And then in grades kindergarten through 12, age-appropriate internet safety is what press recommends. And for us, it's in grades 3 or above. Is there background there on why the age and grade ranges are different than what press recommends?
It could have been through the process. I don't have all of my documents with me. So I don't know what the history is off the top of my head, to be honest with you. Maybe David Smith knows about the curriculum for the internet safety, if he wants to jump in.
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
Well, I don't know if I can answer the question. I mean, internet safety there's a requirement for internet safety curriculum in order to meet the E-rate guidelines and so on.
Well, I guess that's what I'm confused. Press is saying in grades kindergarten through 12, age-appropriate internet safety must be taught. And now ours says in grades 3 or above.
We could go with press's version, and I would say it's probably appropriate to do so, since now we do have the devices going all the way down to kindergarten with iPads.
Yes.
I believe it should be K to 12.
And it is already happening. Our librarians, as part of the curriculum that they deliver, they use currently, I know the resource they're using is Brain Pop, and we had worked with them. When I was in the role that Scott Grenz is in now, a few years back, we had tried out. I encourage a couple of them to look at Common Sense Media is another program that is widely used, and it actually has a lot of support from private industry. It's a free resource. So we are doing that in our lower grades, beginning in kindergarten and first grade.
Yeah, I think it's incumbent upon us, and I'm very happy to hear, especially if we're putting these devices in these kids' hands during the school day. I'm really happy to hear that we're doing that. Go ahead, Dave. I'm sorry.
I'm just going to add real quickly that on the technology committee, through the technology committee, but I think there's going to be a spinoff. There will be revisiting of the curriculum, and I believe they are looking at K-12. So I think it's consistent to make it K-12 in the
do
policy.
you want it to read the entire number 5 from press, because there's additional verbiage?
I mean, it's mandating education about appropriate online behavior, interacting with other individuals on social networking websites and in chat rooms, and cyberbullying awareness and response.
So do you want to incorporate the entire number 5 from press into ours?
I mean, that seems to me to be logical. I don't know. So Mark, where do you feel like that puts us? I don't.
Having not reviewed the kindergarten or not having reviewed the learning and teaching side of these policies, I'll say this: that generally press, you would be surprised if you look at school code, the amount of very specific things that are given to us that we must teach in curriculum. And oftentimes the press policies are just exact carbon copies of what is in school code. Although I don't have the press policy in front of me, I'm just looking at what's on board docs. I would guess that we probably, and we may have missed a policy update here, which is the reason why there's a little difference between our grade levels and what the press policy says. But we should probably reflect the press policy and make sure that we're following it, because oftentimes it's just a direct copy and paste from school code's requirements.
Yeah, I agree. And they're incorporating the policy number of 6.235. So I think it should read that.
And what about number 4, Courtney?
So number 4 really has to do with kind of that says, so for us it says same thing, 4 through 12, everything else about conflict resolution, violence prevention, stuff like that, and press says kindergarten through 12. So I'm just wondering, are we doing something like that already? And why are we making, why does our policy differ from what they're recommending?
I can check with Nikki and Scott, confirm that what press says in 4 and 5 is actually correct. And if that's the case, put that forward. If not, I will let you guys know that there was some difference.
Right.
Okay.
The one thing though that is it says if it can be funded, it should be provided if it can be funded by private groups or the federal government. So it does not require that it must be. It just said it can be funded. And the ideas of things to stress within that funding, within that training. So I think whether, I'm just saying whether there's something, I don't think that's a prohibitive statement in number 4.
I think the only difference
us to doing
there is the grade.
Yeah.
I think that's the issue.
It's just
Yeah, I think our number 4 just reflects that we're doing starting in 4th grade.
Correct.
And the press reflects that we're starting in kindergarten.
Right.
Well, actually, press reflects that it can start in kindergarten.
right.
It doesn't have to. It can start in kindergarten.
Right.
Sometime.
This is Dave on number 5. I don't have the press version in front of me. I have the public. It says in grades 3 or above. Is the word "or" in the press copy?
No, it says in grades kindergarten through 12.
Okay. The word "or" was a little bit confusing to me. So as long as it is more clear in the press version, that would be good.
Yeah.
So I guess, Margaret, if going back to number 4, because our policy also reads provided it can be funded. If we change that to kindergarten and left the provided it can be funded, it really isn't boxing anybody into mandating them.
Exactly.
Yes, exactly.
So I would like to see it changed to kindergarten for both of those. And it sounds like for number 5, we're already doing it. And for number 4, it would be great if we could do it, but if we can't, there's still that provided that little loophole.
Well, for what it's worth, we have all of our buildings are PBIS schools. And so PBIS covers 4, and that starts at kindergarten. The relationship between drugs, alcohol, and violence, we use DARE through the Elmhurst Police Department. So, these programs this is addressed very commonly through both of those programs in multiple school districts. So we're covered here.
Great.
Okay, so make the changes to read press version.
Yes.
For number 4 and
4
5.
and 5. Okay.
That makes the most sense to me.
Great. Thank you. All right, then we are moving on to 6.150. Home and hospital instruction, and Dr. Volpe does not see any challenges to this, saying that he agrees with the recommended language, clarifying that a written statement is required, and then further delete. Why am I cannot get this? Thank you. This word always gets me. The professionals that can produce this statement. You know, doesn't everybody have one of those words?
Oh, yeah.
This is that's my word.
Yeah.
Margaret's going to chime in every time she sees that word from now on because she knows I can't say it. So this makes sense to me. So any discussion or questions?
Nope.
Nope.
All right, adapt 6150. Moving on to 6300, graduation requirements. So my understanding of this is basically it is an attempt for press to make sure that kids know what kind of financial assistance is out there post high school, and they're basically doing that by forcing them to apply for grants and assistance, or acknowledging that opportunity is there for them, but they don't choose it.
This is actually state statute, or
okay,
this is
there you go.
Comes from school code.
So here is a question, and this is a process question. How will this be enacted? Are there plans already for this enaction of applying for the FAFSA or the waiver?
It's going to be something we're going to have to adapt to, but I'm sure that, through our counselors at York, they're oftentimes the ones, working with their seniors and starting to figure out their transition plans for when they graduate. And so this will have to become part of that process.
Yeah. That's just, I agree. I'm just curious. I know that counseling department, it's great.
Swamped.
It's also swamped. And there might be a sizable number of students who choose not to go to college, and or maybe then believe they don't have to see the counselor. So just to note that operationally, we need to make sure that there's a plan in place that we catch these students now that it's a policy.
A good point, Margaret.
Okay, so that's 6300. Moving on to 720. You got the Luke thing, right, Ellen?
Yeah. Yep, I already got it.
All right. And
Thanks.
so you're welcome. This has to do with harassment of students. And it really, anything here, Mark?
No, this is making sure that we put it in front of, we put it in our handbooks, and just more of a cross-reference with policy 2260.
Great. All right. Any questions or discussion? All right. Moving on to 7150. Agency and policy interviews. And I will just say that, I'm sorry, police interviews, apology. Dr. Volpe says that it appears to me that our current policy addresses many of the procedural items that the new policy asks us to create. No inherent challenge to adopting the new structure. I actually love the addition of the recognizing the impact that an interview is going to have on a student, because whether they're a witness or other, I mean, it does have an impact on that student. So I really applaud this addition. All right, any questions or discussion? All right. Moving on to 7270. So this one has to do with the administering medicines to students. Mark, do you want to give an overview, or do you just want me to?
You know, Courtney, I've had a lot of conversation with Michael Volpe and Jen Conwell regarding the new paragraph on administration of medical cannabis.
Mm-hmm.
And I gave you, I think I sent to you guys part of their discussion regarding this. They're not sure we should have this in our policy at this point. They went back and forth. Michael was asking if we had any students currently who this, refers to. Jen said in the past we've had one, and that was it. So in the end, I said, do we put this in or do we not? And nobody got back to me. So I don't know where they stand at this point regarding the medical marijuana or the cannabis. So Mark, you might know if it has to be in here. I don't know.
Well, if we end up having a student that requires it, then we're going to need to have something to give ourselves some guardrails. Like, this is what we will do, this is what we won't do, this is what the student's responsible for, what the parents are responsible for, and so this policy is a reflection of Ashley's law. But I also understand Jen Conwell's concern that, this is a state law that is not backed by federal law. And so that is the hang up. We could, the first part of the policy, administering medication to students, that part of it is fine. I just make sure we're talking about that. And that should change. The administration of medical cannabis, Michael said we could, sit on this for a little bit if we so choose. But then if we had a situation where a student came to us with a prescription and said, here you go, I need to, this is what my doctor says, then we will be a little bit behind the eight ball in terms of having now granted, whenever we have a student that has a medical concern, we do work with them one-on-one in order to make sure that we have, the appropriate supports in place. I mean, that could be as simple as what happens if a student comes in a school in a cast, right? But if we have what the policy I think gives us is, if we have a student that is prescribed medical cannabis, these are the rules by which medical cannabis can be brought into our buildings. Mm-hmm. Versus if we're not having anything in writing, and somebody said, all of a sudden we catch a student with cannabis and they say, well, it's medical and I have a prescription for it. Well, if we have a rule in place that says that, well, if you have a prescription for it, this is what you should have done, then that allows us to handle it, in an appropriate way. So, well, I know Michael expressed a few concerns, and there were some concerns from Jennifer. So I'm not sure I wasn't sure, Ellen, if there were any other conversations. Am I summing up your conversations with Michael correctly?
Yeah, you are. Yeah.
I think for me I agree. I think we need the guidelines. I am not in favor of adopting a policy that puts any of our nurses in a position that they are not comfortable with. And when I look at Jen's kind of rundown of what a nurse in a school setting can and can't do, and they are not legally allowed to administer medications without orders. And the orders must contain very specific information, including dosage. And registry cards are not physician's orders, and dosage along with other specifics is needed, and that's not usually indicated. I feel like we're putting them in a really bad spot. And I do feel, but I'm balancing that with we do need some guidelines. Right. But I worry about putting our nurses in that spot.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's some redeeming qualities, like the fact that the product may not be administered in a manner that, in the opinion of the district or the school, would create a disruption to the educational environment. I mean, there are safeguards in this language that give us the ability to, if a student should present the need for this, gives us the ability to control the situation versus not having something in writing.
I mean, is the option just to take the nurse section out as someone who can administer it? Is that an option?
Well, it needs to be
Right, because
supervised.
like I said, I agree that we have a, yeah.
Well, and the FDA approved piece as well, so.
We can hold up on this piece. Like Michael said, he didn't feel that it was a, real-time sensitive thing. And we could bring it, put it forward with the few revisions in the first page, and then put this for the next time we have a policy committee meeting and see if anything has changed.
Right.
And that would be Kathy's responsibility to keep track of that.
Right. Yeah. I hear you, and I guess you're right. The only thing is, if school opens in August, if school, then how might we manage this? So while I agree, it's not a get it done in June and July. We have to be sure this is somehow, maybe addressed very close to the beginning of the school year.
Yeah, and maybe it's a discussion that, Jen and Michael, need to have a more extensive discussion and find out where they are comfortable with. But I do think we have to figure this out.
And Michael will be gone at the end of the month also. So
Right.
It'll be Kevin who will address this.
Right.
And maybe he has more, maybe he has different insight or a different perspective on this
Yeah.
that we're missing.
So if and then I'm asking this of Margaret and Ellen, but can we move forward with the that first section of changes, administering medicine to students, and then hold off on the
Absolutely.
administration of the medical cannabis section? I would feel comfortable with that.
Definitely.
And just so we can get some more insight and discussion about it, because I really just don't want to leave our nurses hanging out there doing something they're uncomfortable with.
Right.
And it sounds like based on their guidelines are not allowed to do.
Right.
But again, the policy is written in such a way, just my viewpoint, it says that the state laws, which they named the Compassionate Use of Medical Cannabis Program Act, allows it to be administered by one or more of the following individuals. So it says it may be administered by a nurse. It may be administered by the student themselves under the supervision of a nurse or administrator. It may be supervised by a parent or guardian who registers with the Illinois Department of Public Health as a designated caregiver. So these are mays. These are not musts. And so
right, but I guess my question is, if the nurses aren't willing to do it, why are we even saying it may be that person?
Well, but
right, because based on what Jen is saying, they're not going to do it.
right. So, but I hear Mark's point that so it may be a nurse, but it doesn't have to be a nurse. So if you can find someone else to do this, then we can move forward with it. If your parent is able to do this,
The parent has to come in, or
yeah,
right.
So
And that's why I was wondering if we could keep this paragraph and just take out the nurse portion. It may be a parent or it may be the student.
Okay. I mean, that would be a reasonable option.
But is it worth trying to dissect it?
or do we leave it and then let the nurses decide in their policy, in their procedure, how they're going to handle that based on the other guidelines they have to follow? Does that make sense, Mark?
Yeah, it does. I mean, thinking practically, I realize that we want to give everybody flexibility and we don't want to force people to do something that's not in their comfort zone. But, we haven't seen a single situation where the federal government has tried to override the state governments in the legalization of cannabis, whether it's for medical or even recreational use. Certainly the medical use part of it was first accepted in Illinois. Now it's legal for recreational use. So and we have not, there has not been a single person that's willing to crack down. There's, a large group of people, I think, that eventually it's going to be pulled off of the Controlled Substances Act completely. So I don't see that. I understand the ethical concerns. I really do. I think long term, this is going to be something that's just going to be, it applies to so few students, and the students that this do apply to are so sick.
Yeah.
You know, like for example, you know, Ashley's Law with the young lady with the seizure disorder. I mean, these are rare cases.
Yeah.
So, but I understand if we want to sit on it, there's no danger in sitting on it, but it will be something we're going to have to do sooner rather than later if we can't sit on it too long, because eventually, you know, serving 8,500 students a year, we're going to have a situation where we're going to have a student that's going to have this prescribed to them, and then we need to be prepared to manage it.
Right. And that's my only concern in moving part of it forward, is that it's easy to forget this portion. If we move part of it forward, it's easy to forget. If we hold up the whole policy, then we know it's standing, you know, it's waiting for us.
Ellen, do you
We've
know?
got to come back to it.
Yeah.
Ellen, do you know if Michael reached out to Forensic Legal Counsel?
He did not.
Okay.
He did
This
not.
may be this. We may talk to our attorney. Our attorney says it's, you know, Ashley's Law. You got to do it.
Yeah.
You know, so
That's very.
Yeah.
That's true. That's
so
true.
why don't we take this back and run this by legal counsel, and we can have some more information to you pretty quickly.
Okay,
Great.
I could do that.
Great. And
Yeah.
maybe Kevin in his, you know, in his new role has some insight and experience in his former position that he can bring to the table for us to help
So
us
at
kind
this
of
point-
balance.
What do you want to do for June 16th if we don't have a resolution? Because this is going to have to go through the three of you. Do you want to just bring this whole policy back at another time? Or do you want to put forward the first page and we'll look into the second page, or put it forward if I have?
I kind of agree with Margaret. Like if we start piecemealing it, things are going to get lost. So I feel
Yeah.
like if we pull the whole thing and then can reevaluate the whole thing after talking to Kevin, after a little more research, and then talking to Forensic and see where we're at.
Okay.
You're right, Mark. We might have to, they might be like, yeah, whatever. You have to adopt it.
And if we have that answer by Friday,
It could
Yeah,
go
that was
forward.
Right.
Then we're done. Right.
Yep.
Right.
I'll talk to them tomorrow. I'll give them a call tomorrow.
Great.
Ellen.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so I think we have just completed the October 2019 updates.
All right.
And we are moving on to the March 2020, a much smaller stack. Thankfully. All right, so the first one is 2.125, which addresses board member compensation and expenses.
Mhm.
Guess they're paying for the first bag check.
Yeah, they added ride sharing. which-
And Uber. You can
Sign-
Uber
signs,
and
right?
check a bag. That's basically what this says. You can Uber and check a bag.
There you go.
So any discussion or questions about this one?
None.
Let's see.
All right.
One up.
Moving on to 2.160, the board attorney. So just kind of, defines who the board of ed. Ellen, can you replace that in the first sentence as a board of education, put that word may back in?
Yeah. Yep.
It was struck with the rest.
Yep.
May retain legal services. Thank you.
Yep.
Any questions about our board attorney identification and parameters?
None.
Okay. Moving on to 560, expenses for general personnel. Looks like, let's see here. Oh, here we go. Sorry. Additional requirements for travel expenses charged to federal and state grants. There's a long list, 9 bullet points of expenses, the requirements they must meet to be reimbursable.
Seems reasonable.
Yeah, that's just GATA.
Yeah.
Yep, makes sense. Okay, 560, good. 6280 is grading and promotion. And I think it really is just including the performance on standardized tests. I think changing some wording required by the
Required by the state, right?
Yep, required by the state. Any comments or discussions? All
None.
right.
No.
Moving on to 770. This one is attendance and truancy. Again, I think it's just kind of adding in some identification of the codes that reflect the policy. Anything additional? Yeah. Anybody else see anything? Okay. Nothing noted. 770 will be added on to in reading. So the next one is 790. Now we currently do not have a policy for release during school hours. And this press would address that, kind of define what requirements are necessary to be released during school hours, early dismissal announcement, and for voting. Mark, how was this handled before this? I mean, was it just kind of understood, I'm going to go vote, and students were allowed to go vote, or were they released early with a parent's note? How was it handled before we even had a policy on it?
Oftentimes they would just vote before or after school, or their parents would sign them out. I mean, it's not going to change anything operationally. It's just putting it in policy.
Okay. Makes sense to me. All right. Questions or discussion?
Goes along with procedures, just now it's in policy.
Official.
Yeah.
Yep. All right, moving on to 810. Community relations, connection with the community. I think, so this is 810. And I don't think there's many changes, or I think our policy already.
Bev wants us to keep the policy the way it is. She doesn't want to make any changes.
Right. So she does not want to add in like examples of, using social media platforms,
Right.
Facebook, Twitter. I think they're understood in our current policy. And I agree. I don't think we need to start detailing those kind of details. So I think the way she's communicating with the community is pretty thorough.
And that stuff changes so quickly.
I know.
Yeah, right.
Yes, that is true.
All right. So any questions or discussion about 810?
None.
Okay. So we'll adopt. So then 8110.
830.
830.
Oh,
Yeah.
sugar. Sorry. 830. Got them all mixed up. 830. This has to do with visitors and their conduct on school property. And Bev has reviewed this policy and agrees with the changes. And I think it just expands kind of the who is on the property and what the property consists of and the behaviors that are expected.
Mhm.
I did find, Mark, and
Yeah.
maybe you can help me, that paragraph about the exclusive bargaining representative agent. Has this always happened anyway?
Yes. So, I mean, if one of our bargaining units was meeting, with their, like Arnavaz from the IFT or Chris White from SEIU, I mean, they come in and usually are most of the time if they're coming in, most of the time they're coming in to meet with us too. So,
Yeah.
Yeah.
so there's no issue with that.
Okay, great. So it was always just done and now it's just kind of being reflected in the policy?
Mhm.
Okay.
Great.
All right. So 830 is adopted. And then finally, last one, 8110. So this one has to do with community relations and how community members can contact the district. I will say there was an email, Margaret, asking Bev for some clarification on why this change was brought forward and was it really necessary. And I did note that the justification in the footnote from the press recommendations basically indicates that it's basically discouraging school community members from engaging in the disruptive practice of mass CCing district staff, right? So basically mass emails that are going out. I wonder if this happens, right? Like, is everyone in our district staff getting mass emails, CC, if a topic that's very specific, is everybody getting CC? Because I do worry that the community will view this kind of change as us trying to restrict their communication. Because I do think, especially with number of changes that happen in personnel, it's sometimes confusing to know who to email. So I do worry that this will be interpreted poorly. But I also want to be sensitive. Like, if our district employees are just getting spammed with tons and tons of blind copied or CC'd emails that have absolutely nothing to do with them, I do think that is something that we should consider when discussing this.
If I could just throw in here that the way our email groups are currently set up, they are not open to the public. If a member of the public happens to be part of an email group, then they are able to email to that group. So I know this may not be a policy question, but I'm just speaking from an implementation standpoint. It's not really possible right now for somebody to spam a large group unless they're a member of that group. So I just want to put that out there. You guys can discuss whether that needs to be a policy piece or not. But I just want to mention that. So information.
And so, Dave, that's a great point. And so what about from like marketing? I mean, our district employees, because we can all guess what everybody in the district's email is if you know their first and last name. Is there a filter for that type of email communication as well?
Well, there's one of our email appliances that we have does through algorithms and stuff, it does more or less detect what's considered marketing, and it does put I know that those of us that work for the district see it. It puts a little tag at the front of the subject line that says marketing. It attempts to identify what's considered marketing email. It's not perfect, but it does a pretty good job. So I'm not trying to sway you one way or the other. I just wanted you to know that to mass email our district employees, you would either have to be a member of one of the large email groups, which is not likely, or somehow get like a very long list of email addresses and compile your own, your own list. So I just thought I'd inform you about that.
Yeah, I think that, thanks, Dave, because that is very helpful. And the challenge with this is it could be perceived that we are trying to minimize communication. And that's not the intent of here is community relations. So we want to make sure that our community, particularly our parents, feel very comfortable contacting appropriate staff. So I think that we're protected. My suggestion is that we exclude that statement because we are, in essence, protected from this mass marketing that could incur, and leaving that statement in, I think will minimize the perception of openness and transparency.
I agree, Margaret. I think that it's putting too many parameters on the community being able to contact us. And unless it's a problem that we need to address, which it doesn't sound like, from what we're hearing here at least, it is, then I think it would be better to leave that out personally.
I agree. I agree. I think that although I'm sure the suggested changes, although well intended, don't apply here in our district, and I do worry about the perception of what this policy change is trying to do. So, and especially hearing from Dave, if they're not getting spammed and they're not receiving 100 emails a day, I just don't know that this policy reflects what it's trying to accomplish.
So leave our policy as is.
That would be my recommendation.
Okay.
That would be my recommendation as well.
Mine as well.
All right.
Okay, so I believe that is all of our updates. Are there any policy discussion topic updates that anybody wants to add in? I'm sorry, go ahead, Margaret.
No additions. I was just going to say, and that is, so the next step is we would bring this for the first reading to the June 16th meeting. And then for those, then the next one would be the July meeting. Is that the plan?
Yeah, so the first reading will be at our June 16th board meeting. The policies will be presented and read then, and then
She freeze?
Oh, I think she froze.
I think
Okay.
she's frozen.
Okay.
So first reading June 16th, second reading July, second reading and adoption at that point.
Okay.
adoption
Perfect.
after the July meeting. And I may have used the word adoption of policy throughout the evening, but I just meant that we are all agreeing. The adoption happens after the second reading in the July board meeting.
Correct.
Correct. Thank you. Perfect.
No, thank you. All right, so any other policy updates? Nope. All right, in that case, I will call the meeting adjourned.